Right, we have a special treat today because I'm behind the camera and now we have the other half of Thoth, Chris,
The better half.
in front, well, I don't know if I'd say that, in front of the camera. So, why don't you talk a little bit about your magical practice and stuff like that? Let's talk about your past and things, because most of the time I'm in front of the camera, particularly for the YouTube, and you know, the clients will meet you and lots of people at events meet you, but not necessarily people that follow the work that we do online.
But I don't know your personal practice.
Well, they might not know my personal practice, but we can make something up about your personal practice.
Okay.
So, what got you started in witchcraft? What was that? What was that pull? Why did you go down the witchcraft route as opposed to other forms of magic? Ceremonial magic, for example.
Oh, it's too much hard work.
What, ceremonial magic?
Yeah. So whole magic's too much hard work. It's all about, perfectly crafting tools that then need to be all used in a particular order with particular no, that's not me. I like things to be a lot more organic. So my work is a lot more, well, you would call it low magic, wouldn't you? Is what you're forever calling about. I like nature work. Working with nature.
Ceremonial magicians would probably call it lower magic, but I suppose it depends on what you see the differences in practitioner and the approach, really. With witchcraft, it's kind of very gutsy, rootsy, very much about the witch's personal power, whereas I don't know if you'd think ceremonial magic is all about kind of perfecting procedures to give to someone else.
Yeah, I guess so.
With the grimoire tradition and all that kind of a thing, it's all very ritual, sciencey, this happens.
Experimentational kind of work, but I don't know, I still manage to do experimental work. It's just when how do I normally explain to you? So I would normally say, when I craft a spell, it's the same way in which I would paint a picture. So all the elements are there, they're painted in situ where they are, and the colours blend, etc, etc. That is how I form a spellcraft, when I'm spellcrafting. Whereas most people would say, I need this, and I need 2 of those, and then 1 of them, and then put those 3 together, 1 plus 2 plus 3, that sort of thing. Whereas my work doesn't work like that. It's a lot more organic, instinct-led. I would go out and go, I want to do this today. And by wanting to do that, throughout that day, certain things would arrive in my path, and I would take elements from each of those to craft the work finished.
Intuitive.
Yeah.
Well, we do normally teach
creative work.
We normally teach starting from an intuitive approach or the intuitive method. So who taught you witchcraft magic?
Well,
come on, spit it out.
Okay, most of mine I've learned over multiple lifetimes. So for me, witchcraft is about remembering how I used to do it rather than discovering a new way to do it. Maybe that's why I don't like ceremonial magic. It's kind of too paint by numbers, and is the experimentation work I've already done. So to experiment with something I already know how those components work makes no sense to my natural way of working.
Yeah, which is interesting that you pick a witchcraft route, because if you're defining witchcraft as a European rootsy kind of gutsy magical practice, that involves not just European systems of magic, but also very earthly magic. Now, if you're talking about cobbling together your knowledge that has been accrued over many different lifetimes, then you're talking about, combining lots of different cultures and as well as experiences not necessarily as a human.
Yeah.
So how does that really factor in your work? What approach do you take? Do you just decide, okay, we're taking a witchcraft route because that's the route that I've decided I'm going down because of the body that I'm in and the place I'm in? How does it really work?
I suppose everything for me is very situational. So it's a case of a client comes. A lot of my work is client based.
So you're talking mainly just professional, not personal practice.
Yeah. So my personal practice is just like breathing. I don't really think about it. There's no constructed part of how I work. It's instinctual.
Yeah, because that's a huge difference. I mean, that's normally why we talk about being professional witches as the
Yeah.
type of practitioner that we are, because
For
you've
me,
always...
it's like water birth. It's that part where you already know how to swim. So in that moment, you swim. That is exactly how my personal practice is approached. I meet a new tree. It's not a new tree to me. Or, you know, it's a younger version of a tree I have met before. So, you know, so it's just kind of like that relationship is already half there.
Yeah.
So it's just a case of trying to remember the language or remembering the last time I had that conversation and having it again.
So if pretty much all of your magical practice revolves around being a professional and professional witchcraft, what made you decide to actually do that? Why become a professional witch instead of just having a mundane occupation? What makes you want to help other people? Is it the money? Is it the intrigue? Is it the feel that you need to help others along their path? What would you say the draw is to you being a professional?
Well, it can't be the money because we give far too much away.
But you're capable of
far
making
much
as
for
much
money,
money as
but
you want. There are
yeah.
clients out there that will pay hundreds of thousands of pounds for
Yeah.
one spell.
Yeah, whereas I suppose when I'm not particularly interested in those ones, the kind of clients I like are the ones that make me no money at all. So they're the ones that just need to reach that next level of where they're already going. I think I like the problem solving part of it, of going, and I also like, and that's in people and anything anyway, is that seeing things from as many points of view as possible. I suppose probably to see if I can find a new one.
Right, yeah.
I think I've seen it from so many different angles that now I just want to hear how other people see it and then push that and say, well actually, if you see it that way, how about trying this? Or how about you go and do, because it's not even that specific with me, is it normally? It's normally go for a walk, see what you find. Or you've got that. Okay, how would you put those three things together?
You're trying to teach intuition and combining a person's own intuition with witchcraft, which is your personal approach, but people don't necessarily have the same database, shall we just say, to draw from that you do. So how easy is it to teach an intuitive method to people? I mean, it is intuition, so technically it should be anything goes, but do people not grasp it?
To a certain extent, I don't think it matters. To a certain extent, like with most people, they understand their language, and what they need to understand is, I don't need to understand your language. You need to understand it. So in your language, what would this be? So, you know, I'm trying to think of a really plain example, but you know, when it goes to why we don't use, why I will never use a rose quartz for an attraction or a love spell, because I hate the colour, and I also really hate rose quartz. But it's just a case of, if you go to somebody, okay, well, what does that one mean to you in your language? What does this one mean to you in your language? Okay, well, I want you to go and find these three items, you know, these three things that mean this to you. That way I don't need to know their language, they just need to know it. The intuitive method part of that is teaching them, well, okay, well, you found those three, why did those three come together in that arrangement for you? And then getting them to push that to the next level. okay, so you've got those 3 items, you've built this, well I want you to now do this with it. And they go, okay, well, but I've formed it for that. Okay, well what do you need to do to these 3 items to make them do that?
So, in terms of teaching, because you've been teaching for a long, long time, if we're just taking this one lifetime, you've still been teaching for quite a few years now.
Yeah, almost 2 decades.
Yeah, why is it that, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you find that a lot of other people that teach magic, occultism, witchcraft, teach the intuitive method? Do you find that many people do that, or do you think that that's quite an absent way of teaching?
Ooh. I don't think I've ever thought about it, but yeah, I guess so. Most teachers I don't want to say it, but at the same time I want to say it, which is they have their own set. So not necessarily a traditional set of correspondences, but they have their version, and what they tend to teach is their version.
Well, I think that it's kind of very often, because I think it shows the practitioner. If you've got someone that has learned a system of magic, they've come from knowing nothing to knowing something in one lifetime, and they've found a system of magic that's got them that far, then all they tend to be able to do is teach that system of magic. So there's rules and things to systems and procedures and stuff, and very often, whether it be Wicca or ceremonial magic or hoodoo, there are things that you can pass on to someone. However, when you're really just trying to understand the laws of the universe and your personal intuitive take and practice, is maybe a little bit difficult, because you're not really teaching a system, are you? You're teaching techniques.
No, technique. The focus is always on technique for me.
So what do you think is the limit of a lot of the students that you meet then? Do you look at a student and say, well, that person could get this far, or that person can only get this far?
I don't like to limit people. I think everybody with enough time and energy can get to wherever they want. I find the limiting factor tends to be what they think they can achieve in one lifetime, or the option, which is the other part, is that they are limited to only completing the process in one lifetime. I don't think enough people look at the bigger picture of that and go, well, if I tick these boxes in this lifetime, well, I can come back and finish that work next time. They've got that kind of deadline they think of literally death. So that wasn't a pun, but you can take it as one. Deadline.
Yeah, no, I think we got it.
But yeah, I think people focus too much on that, and I think that part of it limits where their creativity could go if pushed.
Okay, so lifetimes, past lives, future lives, that kind of thing. Reincarnation, I suppose, is becoming a little bit of a theme in this interview. So when it comes to reincarnation, can you explain how you see that working? Or how would you explain how reincarnation works to someone that doesn't really understand it or doesn't have much experience with it?
Okay. Well, we technically touched on this in podcast already, haven't we?
On the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, yeah.
Yeah. I tend to explain it in wheels and cycles. But again, I need to put the disclaimer in there that goes kind of the same way that you teach physics. You learn one kind of physics at secondary school, then you learn a different kind of physics. When it gets to A level and they go, you need to forget everything you learned back at school, like we're going to start again. You then get you get to a degree level, and they do the same again. Forget everything you already knew. Atoms don't look like that. They now look like this. Oh, atoms don't exist, etc., etc. So in the most basic sense, I always use the blueprint of the zodiac astrological cycle that's already there.
The Western zodiac.
The Western zodiac. Although you could probably map that on the Chinese one. The Chinese one would probably be the secondary.
Well, most of your clients Western? Is it a mix of international? Why do you choose
Well,
that one?
I suppose it's because it's one everybody's heard of.
Okay, because the most famous because the
Yeah.
Western culture kind of invades the world.
Yeah, so everybody's got understands what the zodiac looks like. So it's a very basic language to start with.
Is that the 12 sign or the 13 sign zodiac?
12 signs. We talk about 13, just complicates people.
Maybe we'll do a video on that at a later date.
Yeah, put it down on the list. Yeah, so I'll always teach it like that, which is a case of the zodiac in its complete circle is start to finish. And that is a whole soul purpose line. And by that I mean every lifetime that particular soul will go through until it is then put back into the bowl and re-scrambled for a new soul, which is another one they never teach you, but the whole point of completing a soul cycle before you go. So we'll get a bit more complicated if we start talking about, infinite systems, but we won't go there. So, and the most basic, it would go that as you go through that, everybody has to go through every stage. So you may skip some, they may learn a bit about one during another, but essentially there are characteristics or jobs you must complete in Leo that can only be completed in Leo, and then there are ones that it can be then completed back in Aquarius towards the end, and there are moments in each lifetime where you coming back in that cycle allows you to understand what you need to have got out of this lifetime. So some people will spend maybe 30 lifetimes in Leo because they really don't get the point, and therefore they will keep going back. Equally, you could be almost to the end of your cycle and then still go back to a Libra state because there's something you forgot or needed to relearn before you complete your cycle. And then that's when I normally tend to describe, which is why most Pisces are a blur of everything that you will ever meet. No two Pisces are ever the same. You can say that about all signs, but particularly Pisces, because you're most likely in that state if you've completed all the others, because you need to have learned all the others in order to actually handle what you have to put in during Pisces. Obviously, like I say, that completely puts everything on a very linear state. It's not like that, but we're talking preschool here, where all these lives need to be continued and completed in that life cycle to complete whatever purpose that soul journey is for.
It's quite a complicated subject, and maybe we should break this down in a different video and talk, slowly through stages and cycles, and maybe a little bit more about how you'd think that reincarnation would work based on your experience with it and that. But I know this is just a simple
Q&A.
Interview Q&A, but yeah, it's because it's quite a complicated subject. But
yeah, and I think what I like about it is that you can literally draw out the symbols on a piece of paper in a circle and kind of draw them around, pop back and forth, and completely map that out with somebody going and talk through a story of, well, I learned this in that lifetime being this person, then move on to the next one, spend these times and move on space by space by space. And then it's what's so wonderful about any kind of celestial astrological kind of setup means that you can add the layers in next time.
Yeah.
So when the story needs to get more complicated, you can add extra cycles in and you can go back and back.
So when it comes to obviously the business, so Thoth, what avenues do you see this business? Because obviously we both work under the kind of Thoth banner, and although there are a lot of different aspects to the business, what do you see? What is the purpose of it? What is the point that you see? What are you trying to achieve with it?
I suppose for me a lot of it is putting some of that balance back. And I'm probably going to overstep by saying something I probably shouldn't say or whatever, but so be it. So for me, it's putting some of that balance back, where there is so much information out there, and it's the only reason, you know, both of us kind of came out of the metaphorical broom closet to do this, because we could quite happily have stayed as professional witches without ever having needed a brand. We've been doing this for how long? And that's just in this lifetime. Like, to actually think, you know, what's the purpose of kind of coming out in order to actually do more of this publicly? It's just because, yeah, you're at that stage where there is so much information out on the internet, bad information. There is so much out there on Instagram, where they only show one. It very much only shows one kind of brand of witchcraft, and with witchcraft being so diverse, that it needs some of that back in. And obviously, you know, I would like to consider us both fairly trustworthy individuals, unless you know, cross a certain line. But you know, and having that kind of, we don't need to gain anything out of it. So because we don't need to gain from it, kind of means it's a safe place for people to learn and ask questions. And I don't feel like that's there. Like, you know, ever since the beginning of the internet chat rooms, you know, witchcraft has been something people discuss. And now it's getting to a point where it's kind of, there is one particular brand of it being shown.
Which brand's that?
Television. Oh, I just mean in general, like,
okay.
You know, yes, it's very kind of the W word, but just kind of like, thanks to pop culture, thanks to what's available online, to the New Age movement since the 60s, that sort of thing, as that's got off, has then got you to a point where you're now in a very wishy-washy, this is how witches are. And you've gone kind of full role reversal from the scary warty noses to this kind of very, well, how do you put it? Very visual aesthetic.
Yeah.
Of being whatever witchcraft is. And I think they've forgotten that, even to the point that you now got, how many memes do you now see about, oh, I'm this kind of witch, or I'm that kind of witch? It's kind of like, all of these are non-words. They don't tell you anything about that person's practice. I've been taught in that way. You've got a whole set of solitary practitioners who have said, oh, well, because I work with this, I'm automatically that. I suppose, you know, what is it? Like, oh, well, I work with the weather, so automatically I'm a sea witch. Like, what relevance does any of that have, other than these kind of superficial labels that people feel they need to be somewhere on the spectrum? What happened to witch just being enough? Like,
well, how do you define witchcraft then? When someone says, what is a witch? What do you actually say to that person?
Yeah, or a witch would just be anybody that practices witchcraft. The same way every spinner is a spinner. You don't say, oh, well, I'm very specifically a wool spinner, specifically from the 17th century method. Like,
but you do see that in witchcraft.
But you get that in witchcraft, and I don't understand why. Like, witch is enough. Like, I might want to ask, what kind of things, what kind of practice do you do? Like, but that would be kind of like, how would I be useful to you, or what would be a useful conversation to have with you? Whereas, I don't see what these labels go for. But then,
it is very interesting.
It's very much a 21st century thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, if you look at the difference, I suppose, between witchcraft as it used to be and witchcraft now, it's become more of an umbrella term, I suppose. Before, if you were a witch, all of the witches would do something slightly different, I suppose, but they would be famous.
The only thing they have this insane is that they cast spells. Like,
yeah, they had a reputation. Very often it was a reputation, I suppose. Whereas nowadays it seems to me, and I don't know whether you agree with this, that the reputation is out There's no reputation for the practitioner, and there's really just the reputation of the type of tradition.
Yeah.
And that's what they push. So when you get the lineages and the certificates and stuff
I'm
like
a Wiccan, I'm a pagan, I'm a heathen, I'm a, insta-witch. Like, I don't understand what purpose that serves other than grouping people together. Like, but to me, I don't need other people. How do you learn by only having other people around you that are of the same thought? So, me, I want to meet the heathens, I want to meet the pagans, I want to meet the sea witches and all those as witches and just discuss craft. Whereas actually they kind of separate off into, we all want to talk about heathenry, or we all want to talk about this specific brand of Wicca. Whereas, how does that push? For me, I don't understand how one perspective allows you to grow. And I think that's probably where my issue with it is it's got down to the point where I understand wanting to self-identify so you can find people that believe the same thing. That's fine. But if you only brand there in one space, how are you going to learn? Because most of these learn from books. So it's a case of, you can have all those books without meeting those other people and still probably have the same understanding of correspondence.
So where is the line drawn in the sand of what's witchcraft and what isn't? So
for me, it's practice.
Okay, so it's type
if someone
of practice?
doesn't practice,
right,
then they're not a witch.
Okay, so if you were to take a hoodoo practitioner, is that person a witch?
I have no problem with it's a type of witchcraft. It's people affecting change.
Right, so you're thinking,
Witchcraft.
Would you say a witch is a magical practitioner then?
To a certain extent, yes.
So you don't make any distinction between the type of practitioner, the roots of the word witch or anything like that. For you, it's literally magical practitioner equals
magical
witch.
Practitioner, to a certain extent, will class witch.
Okay, so would that be technically from an academic perspective, because you're very much from an academic background, obviously with classics and everything, which is kind of the opposite really of, that approach you must have been trained with anthropology and all that kind of a thing of, if you're just sticking to witchcraft European, this and that.
Between that period and that period, and classifies of this, that leads to that, who leads to that, leads to that. I understand the scientific method. What I quite like about a lot of archaeology, it allows the flexibility of that method. So they've got their framework, and then you apply, actually, that in that area would be this version. And I like that. But yeah, witchcraft for me, it's a craft. So to me, you can have no two spinners are exactly identical, depending on what they have practiced during that time. So beyond specifying that you practice witchcraft, what further definition is required?
Well, I suppose it would be a case of what school you graduated from, wouldn't it? I graduated from this school of spinning and it's considered the best, or it cost X amount, or, blah, 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 blah. But I think that nowadays, certainly when it comes to culture and religion and that kind of thing, there's more identity in it. So if, for example, hoodoo practitioner or a lineage tradition such as Wicca, there'll be people that practice that and call themselves that would get very upset with others who are not a part of that culture calling themselves that. Whereas with witchcraft, you will get witches that are like that as well, but you personally don't really care. For you, it's just a word for magical practitioner.
Yeah.
So when it comes to obviously Thoth Witchcraft or the company, you're essentially saying that you're willing to teach anyone any form of magic.
Within ethical boundaries, yes.
What are those ethical boundaries?
Changes all the time.
So you don't have a set ethical guidelines?
No. If there's a way round doing something, like I won't cause unnecessary harm.